Hi, this is Tracie DeMars with the ReMax Equity Group, and today we're going to talk about closing costs. Closing costs are different than down payments. Okay, so the majority of people, when they buy a home, are using a loan. A down payment is the amount that's associated with the loan program that you're using. So if you're using an FHA loan, you're going to need to bring in 3.5% down payment. That's a loan requirement. Or a conventional loan, you might have a 5% or a 3% down payment loan requirement. Closing costs are not part of the down payment. And this is where people get confused a lot because they think, well, isn't my closing cost part of the down payment, or isn't the down payment part of the closing cost? Two totally different things. So regardless of what the radio tells you, you cannot buy a home with zero out of pocket. So even if you're using a down payment assistance program where you would be able to have, and this is where people get confused a lot too, because if they're using the down payment assistance program, they're getting assistance for the down payment, or they're using a USDA loan for the down payment, and then they're confused where there's still additional costs. Closing costs. Closing costs are the amount that are associated with getting your loan. So what happens if you're buying a home with cash? Well, if you're buying a home with cash, you still have closing costs, but your closing costs are going to be significantly less because they're going to be associated with, of course, the taxes on buying the home and the transfer of the title to the new owner from the seller. So the majority of the closing costs that a cash buyer sees is going to be just associated with the transfer of title. So title fees, title company, escrow, and, transfer fees. But not very many people buy homes with cash. The majority of people will buy a home using a loan. And your closing costs are going to differ depending on the loan program you're using and the lender that you're using, because not all lenders are created equal. So you're like, what do you mean? Okay, remember how I said last time that there's 20 people involved in the purchase sale of a home? Okay, so you're only ever going to see a couple of these people, but there's going to be so many people involved that you are never going to talk to. So when you're getting a loan, you talk to your lender, but your lender also has underwriters, and then they have processing people, and then they have, file people, and the processors are the big one. They're the ones who are actually processing the file, and everybody's got to get paid. That's what closing costs are. The majority, if you're getting a loan, the majority of your closing costs are going to be associated with paying everybody who's part of pushing your loan through to close. What do I mean by everyone's a little bit different? Because some lenders will just charge a flat fee, some will charge points, some will actually have additional what we call junk fees. It's kind of different. So not all lenders are going to charge the exact same amount of closing costs. All right, so we're going to play a little game. I have two loans for you today that we're going to pretend you're going to choose from. And I'm going to pretend I'm going to loan you $1,000 for a year. We have a 0% loan and a 5% loan. Which loan do you want? Well, right off the bat, you're telling me you want the 0% loan. Why do I know this? Because in the class, everybody always chooses the 0% loan. So we're going to pretend that I'm going to loan you $1,000 for a year. Pretend. I actually had somebody get mad at me during the class because after the class, it's like, are you going to really loan me $1,000? No, I don't have that kind of money. Sorry. Pretend. So we're going to pretend we're going to loan you guys $1,000 for a year. And we're going to pretend, I'm going to assume that right now you're telling me you want the 0% loan. So let's take this one step further. You are doing the 0% loan, and you are borrowing $1,000 from me for a year. I'm charging you $200 to borrow that money for a year. Okay? So a year from now, you're coming back and you're going to give me my money back. Okay? So how much of your money do I have a year from now? If you said $1,200, that was a trick question, because no, $1,000 was mine. I loaned it to you. So when you pay me back the $1,000, you're paying me back my own money. But I still have $200 of yours, right? Right. So let's take this one step further. All right. So $1,000 is mine. You gave it back to me after a year, but I still have $200 of yours. So that $200, it costs you 20% to borrow that money for a year. Now what happens if we go to the 5%? All right. So $1,000, $100 closing costs. So if you went with a 5% loan, did anybody go with the 5% loan off the bat? Really? I want to hear from you. So anyways, $1,000, you're borrowing it from me. I'm charging you only $100 in closing costs. So a year from now, you're going to come back and give me my $1,000 plus $50 of interest. So how much of your money do I have a year from now? I have $150 because the $100 in closing costs plus $50 in interest. $150. It costs you 15% to borrow that money for a year. What loan's better? What loan do you want now? Yeah, most of you want the 5% loan now. That's where they get you. Okay. Most people don't realize that all the loan costs and that can equal a different amount at the bottom. It's called the APR. So you're only looking how much is that interest? How much interest did you get? When you talk to your friend, oh, you bought a house? What was your interest rate? How much did it cost them? So for somebody who got a really great interest rate, remember the interest rates are actually from the government. The lender doesn't control the interest rate, the government does. The lender who's loaning you the money can move things around. So they might be charging you 2%. So if you're buying a $400,000 home, you're paying an extra $8,000 in closing costs to get a different interest rate, a lower interest rate. How long are you going to be in that home to make that $8,000 pan out, to even out? If you're only in that home 4 years, it might not have been worth it to pay that extra $8,000 in closing costs to get that lower interest rate, especially when the interest rates right now are so crazy low. Know what you're doing. When you talk to a lender, you want to compare apples to apples, not just the interest rate, not just the payment. How much is it going to cost you to get to that point? This is where it's important. Down payment, the amount associated with your loan that you're getting. And even if you're using a down payment assistance program or you're doing a USDA, you still have closing costs. Closing costs are to pay for basically the loan and the transfer of title. Everyone who's involved in getting the loan to you, getting that loan processed and to get to closing. Those are costs that are still associated. So even if you buy cash, you still have some closing costs with the transfer of title. That does not count into the fact of your earnest money. So next week, we'll talk a little bit more about earnest monies and inspection fees and appraisal fees and how that works in. Remember, you can't buy a home with zero money out of pocket. You do have to have some money. So there are ways with closing costs and getting that taken care of. So I've got a client right now who was buying a home, but they're using a down payment assistance program, but they still have closing costs. Now they have money to pay for their own down payment, but in a multiple situation offers like this, where we have such a hot seller's market, getting the sellers to assist with closing costs can be really tough. So they're going to use their down payment to pay for their closing costs, and now they're using a down payment assistance program for their down payment. So we can write full price offers, and they'll have a little bit more money to do any repairs they need for their new home. There's different options. There's always an option, and you should always ask questions. So that is it for today. If you have any questions, please feel free to call me, email me, text me anytime. If I don't respond right away, I will respond to you as soon as I possibly can. If you have any lending questions, Chris Berg with Cardinal Financial is great at answering questions. He also helps teaches the classes. And his number is 503-320-0925. All our information is available at www.learningtobuyaHome.com. So even if you're selling a home, this is good information to have, and we can always help with questions, because a seller's closing costs are different than a buyer's closing costs. Both sides have closing costs. I do have a spreadsheet, if anybody wants to look at it, that kind of breaks those down. Thanks so much and have a great day.